Can't see my slides. Oh, there they are. Okay. There they are. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon. I'm Jim Townsend, as Congressman Kilmer said, and this is my colleague Ben Eikey. And geez, guys, having to follow Congressman Kilmer, that's not a favorite. Thanks. So I was going to thank Debbie for inviting me to be here. Now, now I'm not so sure. No, it's a great honor to be with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm a proud alum of the New Deal. I was a member of the State House in Michigan, and I'm proud to be I was the first elected official appointed or nominated to be part of the New Deal from Michigan. Senator Gary Peters, he was Congressman Gary Peters at the time, who nominated me for that. I also really want to thank Congressman Kilmer. We have benefited enormously from his leadership. I mean, I just can't say enough about how he changed the dialogue about what Congress can do if it works together. And it's just been an enormous opportunity, and that leadership is sorely going to be missed. But I'm really excited about what he's going to be doing in the future. So, so we really appreciate that. Let me see if I can make this work. Okay, so Ben and I are going to talk to you about transparency and accountability and how you can do that in a way that delivers for communities. So I'm going to, okay, so here's our agenda. I'm going to say a word about who we are, obviously. Then I'm going to channel a little bit of Carl Levin. And usually when I do that, I put on my reading glasses and I do this, for those of you who remember Senator Levin, and really get into what would Carl do in this moment, because I think it's really instructive. We're also going to then talk about TNA for policymakers. Now, it's not that TNA, it's transparency and accountability, but I'm going to say TNA a few times just so I keep your attention. And what we mean by that is, how do we get you to truly buy into transparency and accountability? And how can you then use oversight to do that? And finally, we're going to, Ben is going to walk through some frameworks that we use when we do workshops and consulting with both, workshops with congressional staff, sometimes with members, and then across the country with state legislatures. But really our goal here is to get you a little bit engaged. So toward the end, we're going to try to move as quickly as we can, but toward the end, we're actually going to sort of try to divide the room in half and have sort of half of you take on a little bit of an oversight activity on one piece, one law, and the other half do the other. So we'll see if we can pull this off. I don't know if we can. All right, so the Levin Center is an institute. We're headquartered at Wayne State University Law School in Detroit. Detroit was the late Senator Levin's hometown, and when he retired from the Senate in 2015, he came back to live full-time in Detroit and became a law professor at Wayne and established this center. What we do is we provide training and technical assistance on how to do oversight, why to do oversight around the country and in Washington. We have a Washington office. My colleague Elise Bean is with us. She is the director of our Washington office and did a lot of great work with Congressman Kilmer and his team. We also do and conduct and support research to try to better understand how democracy, in our name it says oversight and democracy, and we firmly believe that one of the reasons we are challenged with people's, shall we say, patience with democracy, faith in democracy, is they have lost faith in our institutions and the ability of our government to deliver. And so we think that oversight and democracy are very, very closely linked, and we want you to think the same way. And finally, we have a thing called the State Oversight Academy, which Ben works with, which does this work around the country in state legislatures. We also think it's really important to engage the public, get the public to believe and understand why this matters. And so we have a whole civic education program that works with high school students to use a congressional investigative hearing as a way to understand oversight and understand history and civics. What would Carl do in this moment? It's probably no surprise to you that we think that way a lot, because Carl was such a tremendous inspiration to us. But I raise that because Carl, in many ways, for a lot of you, is a model. Before he became a U.S. Senator, he was a member of the Detroit City Council. So his background came out of local government. And his inspiration to run for the Senate occurred because he was the president of the Detroit City Council in the 1970s at a time when the city was experiencing probably the most intense urban crisis of any city in the country. And well-intentioned federal policies were supposed to be helping, and in fact, they were making the problem worse. Carl went to the congressional delegation and he got nowhere. Not because those members of Congress didn't care about Detroit, not because they didn't care about their constituents, they did. They didn't think it was their job. Implementation of these housing policies that were blowing up in Detroit's face, that were actually causing people to lose their homes, that's HUD's job. Yeah, Congress doesn't have to, he could not get them to focus. So he ran for the Senate in 1978. He defeated an incumbent, and he spent the next 36 years trying to center oversight in Congress and in the U.S. Senate. So we wonder about what Carl would ask us to do in this moment when we've just had an election that, let's face it, is a pretty strong rebuke to a lot of the things that we work on. And I think he would say this. If I can make this, whoops, let me go back. I want to say one thing about this. To me, this is the best quote from many, many quotes that we have from Carl. And I'm just going to read it. It says, "People haven't rejected the goals of our programs, but they have begun to reject the claim that our programs have anything to do with our goals." That is a distillation, I think, of the moment we are in. Sure, there were a lot of reasons, the economy, sexism, racism, I don't discount those things. But one of the reasons we were so soft, the environment was so ripe for Trump to regain power, is that the environment has been ripe for somebody like him for a long time. He said that in 1979. So what would Carl in 2024 ask us to do? Whoops, sorry. Number one, admit our mistakes. Number two, reestablish the ties between government programs and the people they're supposed to serve. And number three, dig into what it means to provide transparency and accountability in a way that it delivers results that people can actually see. How do we get there? We think there are three things you've really got to emphasize. The first is embrace our role. I say our, we're all recovering political actors here. Embrace our role in transparency and accountability, number one. Number two, embed fact-based collaborative oversight in the policy-making cycle. We're going to spend most of our time talking about how to do that and put you through a little exercise in how to do that. And finally, educate the public to expect this. Our civic education work is about that, but you are public educators. I don't know if you know that, but you're public educators, and you have an opportunity to tell people every single day what they really ought to expect from government. Oh, we're going to get to him in a second. So one of the challenges is in focusing on transparency and accountability is that a lot of people talk about transparency and accountability, but very often it is delivered in a way that really features and emphasizes gotcha politics. It's usually about somebody on a dais with a microphone yelling at somebody else. It's not what Congressman Kilmer was describing, which was more, a situation where people look each other in the eye and try to find a way to collaborate. No, it's usually about calling names. It's usually about blaming somebody else. And the problem with that is that it actually delivers the opposite of transparency and accountability. When members of Congress do it, when state lawmakers do it, when county commissioners do it, when city council people do it, because it gives those folks, those policymakers, the space to deny their own accountability. It's somebody else's fault. I wrote the law, but I'm not responsible for what happens next. That couldn't be more false. And I think all of us intuitively understand that. But we're not set up in our institutions to act on that, to actually make a difference. So we've got to move forward in a different way. We can't be that guy. Whoops. I'm not good at this. There we go. That guy. I chose that guy because I could have picked a picture of somebody serving in the House right now who acts like that, but I didn't for a reason, and that is that I don't want people to think this is only a Republican problem. It's not. Yes, there are some really bad actors. We all know who they are, particularly in the House on the Republican side, pretending to do oversight. And if you think they were bad last term, we all know what's coming, right? But they're not. It is not just them. It is many of us who are more inclined to act that way than they are to really reach across and take responsibility. So how do we move forward in a more constructive way? Well, one way is to admit our mistakes, as Carl would suggest. And this little slide just gives you a sense of, one of the things we all heard this morning from lots of, from the polling and from other leaders, is that we have a big problem with working class folks, and that's even now extending into Hispanic voters and possibly African American voters. So it's a serious problem, and we've got to do something about it. Both parties, though, are aiming themselves at blue-collar workers, and you can see. I just picked these sort of at random. Republicans have a certain set of policies they are promoting to attract the support of blue-collar workers, and then Democrats have another set. Again, I'm not saying these are the exhaustive. This is all the policies, but I think both these sets of policies have one thing in common. And that is that they don't hold up to scrutiny very well. The Republican policies don't hold up to policy scrutiny. In other words, they aren't good policies if you're trying to help working class people. The Democratic policies, I would suggest, don't hold up very well to practical scrutiny. In other words, these are good ideas. They satisfy a test around whether they would help or could help people. But ask yourself, looking at that list of policies, how many of those policies, as they are currently implemented, really move the needle or have moved the needle for working class people? And I think the answer is we have not found how to do that yet, but we really very much need to. Bottom line is we have got to embrace a form of transparency and accountability that these people would recognize. And by that I mean the folks that we are not appealing to, working class, middle class folks, they're accountable in their lives. They don't do the job, what happens? They lose that job. Something goes wrong, somebody gets sick, again, if somebody gets laid off, somebody has a crisis and they can't make ends meet. How many of us in this room would really be in that position if, say, the bill that we introduced and got passed actually didn't work out very well in implementation? We don't have the same skin in the game that they do, and they know it. So in order to be more able to attract their support and their respect, we need transparency that they would recognize. So that's what we're going to try to share with you today. And we're going to focus on this idea of embedding fact-based collaborative oversight in the policymaking cycle. So I'm going to say a few more words about what that means, and then I'm going to ask Ben, who's been patiently. Ben's very tall, so I'm happy he's sitting down right now, let me tell you.
I'm bringing my own microphone up. I think I'm going to have to hunker down too much.
It makes me look very short.
Yep.
So one of the ways we try to help folks understand this is, first, what is legislative oversight? Let me ask, when you think of the word oversight, what pops into your minds? GAO, as one person said? Hearings, right. We think of oversight, or our inspiration for how to think about oversight can be expressed best probably by this quote from a U.S. Supreme Court decision from 1953. And I'll just read it quickly. It's the proper duty of a representative body to look diligently to every affair of government and to talk much about what it sees. It is meant to be the eyes and voice and embody the wisdom and will of its constituents. That's actually Woodrow Wilson being quoted by the Supreme Court. The point is that if you are making laws, Your actual job is to be the eyes and voice and solve problems for people. That's what this is really about. So when we are training people and showing them about how to embed accountability into their lawmaking process, into their service as legislators, again, at every level of government, we use a thing that we like to call the cycle of accountability. So think of this as kind of a clock face. It starts at the 12 o'clock with a problem. So that problem might come from your constituents, it might come from the media, but the point is that you become aware of this problem and decide to do some oversight, fact-finding. Ideally, you are asking open-ended questions where you aren't biasing it towards some answer or some legislative priority you have. You simply are trying to get the answer to what do you need to know about this problem in order to move the needle on a solution without prejudging the solution too much. That might lead to legislation or not, but let's say it does lead to legislation. Then you move, get it passed, it becomes law. Of course, very often that then leads to a regulatory process, then implementation, and then we're back up at 12 o'clock again with an outcome. That is the way it's supposed to work. How many people, raise your hand, how many people think it actually works that way? Okay, I'm glad no hands went up. This is the way we think it works. This is the bill mill approach to solving problems, and we find this in in the legislative branch at every level of government. Essentially, a problem arises, gets on the agenda somehow. There's already a set of bills that somebody's already got developed, and they insert that into the problem. Maybe there is some attention paid to the regulatory process. That depends a lot. And then that's about it. We move on to the next thing. This is not a way to encourage or gain the sort of credibility that we have lost with those folks who in their lives would never be able to get away with this. I'm now going to turn it over to Ben, but the things we're going to show you for the next few minutes, we don't expect you to remember all. There's no test at the end. So Ben's going to talk about sort of these resources and take you through some frameworks, and I'm going to be quiet. Don't worry, I'm not done.
Well, hi, everybody. Again, my name is Ben Eikey. My mom was a kindergarten teacher for 32 years in Flint, Michigan, and that's the way you pronounce my last name is she would point to her I and then twist a key, so Eikey. So that was the way all the kids would always pronounce it. They would always really exaggerate it. They would go, Mrs. Eikey, kind of thing. So every day, I get to work with state legislatures and local municipalities on how to best leverage their authority to conduct fact-based oversight. I have traveled to state legislatures all across this country and have done workshops, have helped to build and think about how we can improve capacity to just find facts, to just get information on what our state is doing or not doing, and then from there, let the disagreements and the politics flourish, but we gotta have that foundation of facts that we can use to be able to build what we wanna do next. So I just want to share a couple of different things that we have here at the State Oversight Academy. The big one that I wanted to share is in the bottom right is that QR code. We have a monthly newsletter, so if you want to keep up on the good stuff that we're doing, in January I'm doing a workshop in Oregon and in Maine. So if you subscribe, you're going to see a really nice side-by-side photo of a smiling me next to the Welcome to Portland, Oregon sign and the Welcome to Portland, Maine sign. So that's, alone enough of a draw. But we also have a lot of other really good news and information about state legislative oversight happening all across the country that we share there on a monthly basis. I also want to share our wiki. So this is information on state legislative oversight in every state and territory all across the United States. We have information on your oversight committees, your authority to conduct oversight, and we also have a really interesting section on this wiki where it's agency and audit, inspector general reports by topic. So I don't know if any of you had this have happened to you, but back when I was working in the Michigan House, my boss is the chair of Corrections Appropriations Subcommittee. And I think about how there was all sorts of criminal justice policies and topics I cared about that I wanted to learn more about, but maybe at the moment I didn't have an audit report from Michigan yet. It never even crossed my mind in those days to think, well, maybe there's one in Wisconsin, maybe there's one in Ohio, maybe in California, wherever. And now we're gathering those reports, and we got them all categorized on the website. So if you've got something you really want to look into more in your state, take a look, check it out, and you can always reach out to us for any questions. This thing's a hit too. Oh my goodness, millions and millions of views. It's very exciting. So several years ago, just to be able to kind of create just the basics, just to like kind of frame categories around state legislative oversight and what we're even talking about, we created these 6 avenues of state legislative oversight. So the first one here, and I'll go through these and I'll be very brief on it. I could talk about this until sundown and then some, but I'll make sure it's a little brief. Analytic bureaucracies are also your oversight partners. So this could be people like an ombuds, or your state auditor, or the nonprofit community, other different resources to gather information and facts. Your appropriations process is how you can use the budget. You can leverage that power of the purse to get information on what's working or what can be done better in your state. I used this all the time back when I was working in Michigan to get a lot of information about the prison system in Michigan. And I keep thinking about some of the things that we were able to improve through doing those processes. I was asking for quarterly reports on things like parole. And I know that some of the problems we were able to solve, there's no bill. There's no bill that we could have dreamt up that would have solved some of the really horrible things that we were seeing happening in those facilities. But because they knew we were looking over their shoulder, we were keeping an eye on them, we were able to help to get things back on the right track. Committee oversight, I know one of the examples was thrown out on hearings a moment ago. That is an example of oversight. There's a lot of other approaches that committees have across the country as well. You'll have some committees that have staff to pump out reports, other different routine. Pennsylvania, within their constitution, have an annual budget hearing where the director must come in and talk about their priorities, and that's another opportunity for oversight for the legislators to be able to say, okay, for this next year, please prioritize this program, what's going on with that program, that sort of deal. Administrative rule review is varied all across the country. A lot of different approaches on this. You have some states that have committee dedicated just to administrative rule review. You have some states that have the policy committees take a closer look. A lot of different variety there. Please take a look at our website and see how your state does it and see if it's something you want to look into and doing more. Advice and consent is going to be looking at gubernatorial appointees, a new department director, something along those lines. Or if you have the reviews of governor emergency orders, that would also be considered within advice and consent. The short-suited of the 6 avenues is monitoring contracts. We have a few states here and there that are doing a pretty decent job of it, and as we've seen more and more private contracted companies and corporations that are providing essential government programs and services, there's this heightened need for the legislature to think through how to leverage their oversight authority to make sure we're getting our money's worth, to make sure that things are being delivered on time, within budget. And there's a few states that are doing a decent job at this, and you can look online for a little more detail there. And those are your overall 6 avenues for state legislative oversight. We have a nice video on YouTube, which features me. So if you want to hear me talk about oversight for 30 minutes, you can pop on there and hear all about the different avenues. So I want to also, this is kind of some basic political science language here about routine versus event-driven oversight, because the toolbox that you kind of reach for if you're in a state trying to do oversight is different if it's something routine, if it's an issue that you think has just been kind of lingering in the state and it's about time we just really took a closer look, or it's a priority, a personal priority for you, and you really want to make sure that this program's working right. The way you do that routine oversight, get the reports from the department, that sort of thing, it's different than your event-driven oversight. That's your firefighter. And so that's going to be, you know, front page Detroit Free Press, something really bad happens. Okay, we got to get together and figure out and understand just what happened, and going through the fact finding and the steps of the investigation, which should be right here. We have our 4 phases of an investigation. So this is going to be your event-driven type of oversight, where you're first trying to gather your facts with your team, and then from there, we put a little arrow because we know sometimes with, again, limited time and resources, you have to do the hearing, which I understand, but we really do recommend thinking about that written product, because it really does create a good framework for that hearing walking in, because then the department knows exactly what you're prioritizing and what you want to talk about. And then after the hearing—
I would just jump in and say sometimes they just have a hearing before they've gathered any facts. We don't recommend that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Know the answers to the questions that you're asking, at least most of them, before you have your hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then after you've done all of that and you want to find out, you know, what happened next, what positive change were we able to impact as a result of doing this work, you do your follow-up. 6 months later, do another hearing. Be able to find out, okay, here we were and where are we now? And if there are certain impediments that are keeping us from being able to get to where we're trying to go, well, what's there? What can we do to be able to get to the desired goal, which is positive, effective governance? I want to talk about factual questions because I think this is also a good way to kind of drift away from more of the like kind of gotcha pugilistic type of oversight which we were talking about earlier. Think about your questions that you're looking to sort of get answered through oversight. You're not trying to prove a conclusion. You're not really like trying to answer a hypothesis. Think about those how and those what questions. This is a great example from the one and only Elise Bean in the back, looking at during one of the investigations among many during Senator Levin's career was looking at oil spills in the Great Lakes. And when they first started to look into this inquiry, they were very positive that oil spills in the Great Lakes are being caused by tankers. These boats were going around the lakes and dumping oil. And they found out from their investigation that it was actually not the tankers, it was the onshore facilities that were actually dumping more oil into the Great Lakes. So if they would have rushed right to a bill, they would have missed it. They would have missed the source and the reason why that oil was being dumped in the Great Lakes. So when you look at these types of questions, this is the one we have here. A good one is what kind of oil spills happen in the Great Lakes and how are they handled is a way to be able to kind of get to that process type of a question. And now I get to kind of put together all of these different slides we've been talking about into one big comprehensive oversight plan. So when I go across the country and I do these workshops, oftentimes this is the interactive portion where people get together and they start to think through row by row by row, making their own oversight plan. It's really exciting to see them, start to do it and the plans start to come into, into reality. So topic is going to be anything that all of you wish to prioritize in your legislature. The one I chose here is looking at healthcare access for people that have been released from prison. And so I have my factual question there. This is an issue in a lot of states across the country where people are being released and they will be approved for Medicaid but not get on it for one reason or another. It's actually quite an issue. So I want to find out how that can happen. So I created my question, and then I think through, on the 6 avenues I talked about before, how can I get that question answered? Is there something that my auditor has done that I can look into? Maybe there was a report from a nonprofit about this issue. I can get that information. Maybe I can hold a hearing. I could require to the budget. Maybe there's a contract. Maybe there's some sort of a contract with some local nonprofit dedicated to helping people get access to Medicaid. How are they performing? Are they prioritizing this population? Being able to use all these different avenues to be able to try to get to my answer. You don't have to use all 6, but it's a really good exercise when you're trying to get questions answered in your legislature to think through all 6 of those and think, okay, which one of these might be able to help get me closer to answers? I got one more slide, then I'm going to kick it back over to Jim. I just wanted to bring up just another like a scenario. So to kind of make this a little less academic and more like kind of on the real ground here, I was thinking about, this is another workshop. This is another workshop exercise that we do across the country, looking at a flood as the example. So you have a flood that devastates a community, part of your state, and now it's been a year and you want to create an oversight plan to be able to look into the disaster response. So there's all sorts of questions you could ask. You could think, okay, are people back at work? Are the roads back built? How's the internet looking? Are kids back in school? Is the hospital infrastructure okay? All those different questions, that was the first column of that previous slide. Those are all of my different topics. And being able to kind of go through and make factual questions on each of those issues could help and really be the beginning of a really good effective oversight oversight report on just what worked, what could be done better for the next disaster to hit. Thank you all so much. I'm going to switch this back over to Jim.
Great. So before we wrap up, there are a couple things we want to do with you all. First is I want to talk about a few examples of oversight leadership that really I think will illustrate what we're talking about. These are 3 leaders who are not in the New Deal, but I think they're good examples that I think will inspire. The first is Sarah Gelser-Bluin is a state senator from Oregon, and she has developed a national reputation by doing in-depth and really effective oversight around child welfare, and was triggered by an event. A child lost their life while in under state care, and she put together a bipartisan group that delved into this issue and issued a report and did a lot of in-depth work that then led to reforms that states around the country are actually starting to replicate. So we're very proud of Senator Gelser-Bluin's work, and it's one of the reasons we've done more and more in Oregon, because there's really a culture developing there, I think, of interest in oversight and accountable governance. The second person we mentioned here is Weston Newton, who is a Republican from South Carolina. And I want to make mention of Representative Newton because I want to make sure everybody understands that two things. One is oversight is something that happens in blue states and red states, in small states, in large states, in states with dense populations, in states that have lots of resources, and states that don't. But one thing that's interesting about Newton, and I'll just briefly, what he did was to pioneer, as chair of the House Oversight Committee, a process where they run through all of their state agencies on a 7-year rolling basis and submit them to a review without a sunsetting provision. They just do this, and they're very public in it, and they engage the public and the agency personnel in participating and providing information around that review. And to steal a little bit from my friend who's going to follow us in this, Jennifer Polka, they focus a lot on listening to frontline workers and listening to the people who are really the people who receive these services. And the point here is that South Carolina, of course, is a deep red state, single party control. Oregon, of course, is a deep blue state. And so is Rhode Island, the third example, Patricia Serpa, state rep. In all cases, though, they've been able to do a lot of in-depth oversight with the executive branch of their party. So oversight does not have to be, the kind of oversight you're probably used to seeing, where divided government, where people are going after the other party, the other branch. I think in many cases it happens because the party in charge feels a duty and is under a certain amount of pressure to deliver. And so for those of you who are serving in red states, really consider the opportunity you might have to work with your Republican counterparts on oversight. Now I want to talk about a few new dealers who are doing oversight, and then I want to take advantage of a couple of new dealers and have you take a look at their work and not evaluate their work, but think about it from an oversight perspective. So Anna Tovar is, I don't know if she's in the room right now, but she is here this week. We chose two people who would be here this week. She is the Arizona Corporations Commissioner, and her work really involves doing oversight as an elected commissioner of the utilities in the state of Arizona. And she really falls into this category of an oversight partner. So she's developing and providing information, but also overseeing the function of some of the phone, the various utilities in the state, as well as certain markets in the state of Arizona. And so she's a terrific partner. If you were in Arizona as a lawmaker, she'd be somebody you could really partner with in delving into some of these issues under your jurisdiction. Jayme Davis is a House member from North Dakota who has done a tremendous amount of work encouraging the Juvenile Justice Committee in North Dakota to use the resources they have at their disposal to dig into juvenile justice issues. They have used their interim session. Some people think the interim is not the time to do work. The interim is a time to do oversight. And her committee has done a tremendous amount of work. They've generated a report, and now the agenda in the upcoming session is going to be informed and driven to some degree by the work that Representative Davis has done. Now, to wrap things up, what we want to do is talk about, Lori, thank you so much for your work. So I want to talk about two new dealers who have some really compelling ideas that some of you may be familiar with. One of them is Krista Griffith, Representative Griffith from Delaware, and the other is Phil Olaleye from the state of Georgia. Krista has a legislative initiative that has now become law, which requires EV charging capability be in every new residential construction. So every house that's built in the state of Delaware going forward is going to have EV charging capability. So that's idea number one. Idea number two comes from Representative Olaleye, and it is a really interesting idea that actually occurs in Michigan and a number of other states, where they take a portion of, his proposal is to take a portion of state education dollars and allocate them on the basis of poverty statistics. He has not gotten this over the finish line. But in both cases, I want you all, and so what we'd like to do is sort of divide the room in half, and we're going to do a quick exercise and then ask for your feedback. So on sort of my side of the room, sort of from the camera over, you're going to be Representative Olalaye's, you're going to be that team. So imagine you're working with him and you're looking to develop a way to embed oversight into his proposal. The reason this is maybe a good idea, it's good for accountability and transparency, but also it might be a way for him to build bridges with moderate Republicans, because he needs to. Obviously, this is Georgia. You're not going to get it over the finish line without a bipartisan coalition. He started to do that, but maybe there's a way that oversight can help. So we want you to just think about, how do we lose our, oh well. We want you to think about his proposal. Again, it's a proposal to require that a portion of state funds for education be allocated on the basis of poverty statistics. What kinds of oversight questions would you want to ask? What kind of structure would you want to put into a proposal like that would allow a year later, 2 years later, for there to be transparency and accountability around that proposal? Does that make sense? Any questions? All right, you all are going to we're going to give you a couple of minutes to just talk to your neighbors and think about what kinds of ideas occur to you in this space. Now, for Representative Griffith's proposal, the half of the room on this side is charged with the same question, but in this case, it's already a law. So if you were in the Delaware legislature, and I'm speaking to you all over here, what would you do to develop protocols, or what would you do, what questions would you ask to conduct oversight? What data would you want to find that would help you assess the effectiveness of this EV charging requirement? Any questions on this side? Okay, so what we'd like you to do is spend a couple of minutes at your tables talking to each other about these ideas. We have George's the bill author is sitting at the table in the center. If you have a question for him, you can ask us, although we don't know as much about this as he does. Representative Griffith, I'm not sure if she's with us, but give yourself a couple of minutes and then we'll come back together and just hear a little bit from you about what your ideas are. Okay, so we'll just call people together. What's that? Yeah, right, let's get the Q&A. Yep. Sure. How do we? Can we get? He's got it. He's got it. So these are that's what you were looking for, right? Yeah. We're gonna ask you guys to report out, or just raise your hands in just a moment. But those are the avenues that we're talking about. Okay, if I could have your attention, I'm sorry we don't have a lot of time to do this, but if you invite the Levin Center to come work with you, we could spend more time on this activity. We're going to start with the Georgia group. Any of the tables have a few ideas you want to offer? All right. Oh, we're going to bring a mic to him. Quick.
Yes. Oh, on poverty and education, draw a direct link between this particular section of Georgia or county or city, wherever it is, rates of incarceration, unemployment, look at the jails, at how many inmates are reading on third, fourth grade levels, and pitch it that way. If it's comes down to crime in particular, talking to the other side,
Right.
That's a kind of say that's a buzzword.
Right. So using statistics, whether they're longer-term statistics with incarceration or earnings rates, or shorter-term statistics that would relate to reading levels or other test scores or what have you. Yeah. Yeah. Right. The other thing you might does anybody else want to volunteer an idea? Yes.
Just thinking, our legislature in Iowa, which is probably of the same, they care a lot about rural reading rates as well, and maybe taking a look at that in addition to what the gentleman just stated as a way of being able to garner more support. But we definitely would take a look through the appropriations processes.
Excellent. Because we're short on time, I know there's many other good ideas on the Georgia proposal, but we're going to shift over to the Delaware bill that relates to EV charging stations. Who had an idea that they want to share regarding how to conduct oversight? What kinds of questions you want to ask?
I nominated myself to be the speaker. We, using analytic bureaucracies, thank you counties, would, with the topic of finding out if it resulted in more EVs being purchased, cross-reference the building permit addresses for the homes that would have had to have it with the number of car registrations for EV cars and addresses from the time periods before the law and after.
Outstanding. Great. Wonderful. I feel like I just want to be fair to our next speaker, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. And just say that we finally just appreciate your attention, and we offer ourselves as a resource at any point. And again, what we believe is really important in this moment is to create accountability and transparency that the folks we are serving would recognize in their own world, their own lives. And hopefully we've given you some thoughts about how to move that forward. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.